What's up, everyone, and welcome to Metalcore Nerds, the podcast that combines heavy music and pop culture. I am Sean Mott, your host, and today I'm going to give my spoiler review of Morbius, the latest Marvel Sony without Spider-Man outing. Before we get into the review, this episode is brought to you by Spreaker. Now, Spreaker is a podcast hosting platform that helps indie podcasts, much like myself, monetize their podcasts. So if you're interested in that, go to Spreaker.com for more details. And if you're new to Metalcore Nerds, welcome aboard. Very happy to have you here. Whether you're watching or listening, please subscribe to wherever you're watching or listening. It helps the podcast out. Don't forget to leave a review if you are listening to us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. That helps people find the podcast. It helps us get more access to things early and bring reviews to you so you guys can know what you're looking for going into new content. Now, Morbius is about a biochemist named Michael Morbius who tries to cure himself of a rare blood disease, but inadvertently infects himself with a form of vampirism instead, basically turning himself into what they call him in the comics, the living vampire. He becomes a vampire that isn't affected by normal vampire things like stakes and sunlight and things of that nature, but he still has the more vampiric capabilities. But the thing is, he does need to consume blood in order to survive, or not really survive in this case, more stay in the state that he's in, not revert back to his rare blood disease, which would eventually lead to his death. It stars Jared Leto and Matt Smith and is directed by Daniel Espinosa. And my main thoughts of this movie, it's really not as bad as some critics or the Rotten Tomatoes critic score has led out to believe. I think this movie was pretty fine. I don't feel like it wasted my time at all. I'm not going to say it's a great movie by any stretch of the imagination. I did enjoy it a lot more than Venom Let There Be Carnage. That movie left a really bad taste in my mouth, being a Venom and a Carnage fan. Not even really the Venom stuff, mostly the Carnage stuff, and the story was just, there was no story there. This one does have a pretty good story, and I would say the beginning and the origin of Morbius was very interesting, and I like that part a lot. It just, as it went on, it just didn't have any depth to it, and it felt very empty by the end. Like I said, it starts off very strong, but then quickly turns into an early 2000s comic book movie by the end. The ending is just all over the place. It's a big CGI clusterfuck fight mess, which seems to be a problem with most of these Sony movies that aren't attached to the MCU or Spider-Man, because Into the Spider-Verse is fucking phenomenal, and people seem to forget that that's just a Sony property and not an MCU property, because it's not connected to the MCU whatsoever, at least not yet. And I will give credit to the trailers in some aspects that it didn't really give away much of the story, and it actually made the origins of Morbius far more interesting in the movie, because you kind of think, oh, do these bats in this cave somehow turn him into a vampire right there? And it's no, he really still needs the blood and DNA from them to create this cure for himself that turns him into a living vampire. And I thought that part was amazing. But when you really get to the Matt Smith of it all, and Matt Smith in this movie is great. And I do think, I know a lot of people don't like Jared Leto, but I thought he was great as Morbius. I think it's a very good casting. I thought he was really good in the movie. It's just, even their relationship as being best friends and then turn to enemies, it's kind of just like a sad, tired trope that didn't really connect for me personally. And when he ultimately kills his best friend Lucian, aka Milo, which the whole Milo thing kind of was weird to me as well, because they kind of, oh, hey, that's not my name, and then he kind of just accepts it. It's kind of strange, but they kind of take it back to it, and they're like, you're the one who named me. And that was kind of nice, because the whole time I was like, why is he still calling him by that name after that first scene? But it does kind of get explained by the end, I guess. But again, this movie just ends up feeling so empty by the end. I really wish we saw more of Morbius descending into madness or descending into villainy. I do love how he was like, oh, I can only live off synthetic blood for this amount of time before I have to go straight to human blood. And I really wish that kind of weighed on him more and made him more, the ending turning him into a full on villain. Not all of these movies need to be anti-hero movies. I think you can make a villain movie and have people still enjoy it. I mean, people watch, almost every HBO series is a completely unlikable character that people end up liking. Succession, Sopranos, and then even like Breaking Bad and stuff like that. It's all remarkably unlikable main characters that people still love these shows, because even people who are evil, they still have aspects that are relatable, which makes it way more. And he's just like, I'm a good guy this whole time. And then his nemesis, who's his best friend, who has the same exact powers as him, is like, I'm a bad guy. And there's no real depth to it. They just kind of happens. And then there's, like I said, the big CGI clusterfuck ending, and then that's it. But like I said, it started very, very strong in my opinion, and then just kind of falls apart. And that was kind of the same thing as Venom. Would say I enjoy Venom a little bit more, the first Venom, a little bit more than this movie. But even that, it was, the villain was totally wasted and Riz Ahmed, and it was the same exact as Venom. And then the end fight was just like a CGI mess, just like this. And I will say the CGI on Morbius looked pretty amazing. The way he looked, the transformation, how his powers were laid out. I really loved all of that stuff. It was weird though, because it seemed like when Matt Smith's transformation, that seemed like a little less value than Morbius's, and I don't know if that was on purpose or if it was later. I have no idea. And the love interest of Martine Bancroft was fine. Again, it didn't really add more to it, but I didn't hate it. It didn't feel forced. Their chemistry felt natural, especially with their working relationship with each other, and her turning into a vampire at the end, which Morbius saves her by giving her his blood, which is how vampires happen in most vampire lore, which I thought was cool, is a thing in the comics. And she ends up trying to become like a true vampire and stuff like that. So I'm kind of interested to see what they do with that. If there is a sequel, I know this movie is still making a good chunk of money, which most of these Sony movies tend to do. So I would guess they're continuing this on, especially with the end credit scenes, which I'm about to get to because there's a lot to talk about with those. My other point in the other side of the trailers is that they left a lot of stuff out that were in the trailers, which I find completely misleading in marketing. And it's not like the Marvel thing where they trick you and they put in different lines of dialogue, they put in different shots to kind of subvert your expectations. And when you actually see it play out in the movie, you're like, oh, wow, I didn't think it was going to happen like that. That's fine. But when you put an Oscorp building in, especially when it's the same logo from the Amazing Spider-Man universe, or you put in a mural of Spider-Man with Murderer across from it that Morbius runs by, and all these interactions with Adrian Toomes that don't happen, even in the end credit scene, and Tyrese having this crazy metal cybernetic arm that doesn't come into play. It definitely seemed like there was a lot of studio meddling in the delays of this and in the editing and final cut of this 100%, especially with the end credit scenes. So the end credits, we see the purple crack in the sky, just like we see in No Way Home, and Adrian Toomes winds up in this universe. Now, this I'm fine with. He knows who Spider-Man is. The whole spell got messed up, and it had to do with people who knew who Spider-Man's identity was, Peter Parker. So I'm totally fine with Adrian Toomes winding up in this universe for some wacky magic explanation. That I'm fine with. That didn't bother me. It's just when he got here, he was just like, oh, cool. Hope the food's better here. Seemed very out of character for Adrian Toomes as the Vulture. And so did the last scene. The last scene of Morbius just meeting him, and he somehow has his suit in this different universe, even though he appeared in prison in a prison jumpsuit. And he's like, let's team up together and do some good. Like, what? It made zero sense. That part. Adrian Toomes coming over here, totally fine with it. I think that can make sense. Magic, weird, whatever. Who cares? It just seemed so forced to lead to a Sinister Six. Now, here's my pitch to would have made this Sinister Six lead up after credit scene so much better. So you begin it the same exact way. You have Adrian Toomes, the purple crack in the sky comes at, but as we're seeing that purple crack in the sky and Adrian Toomes appearing into the cell, we see the city start to warp and shift, like how we saw in the Venom Let There Be Carnage after credit scene with Eddie's hotel room. And we see the Oscorp building from the Amazing Spider-Man universe show up in the city from the warping. Now, Toomes, he was all about his family. That's why he did everything illegal. He gets in there and he freaks out. He's like, how am I here? What is going on? What I need to get to my family. I need to figure this out. We see Harry Osborn, played by Dane DeHaan, come to the jail and get him out of jail. Because at this point, he's not looking all weird. He looks totally normal. And I believe this dude could get a second chance because he's an incredible actor. And then he's still the head of Oscorp, so he has power, and he gets Toomes out of jail and kind of confronts him. And then he says something along the lines of, don't worry, I can help you figure all this out. First end credit scene ends. Second post credit scene starts. Morbius walks up to Oscorp Tower. Now, again, for this to work, Morbius would have needed to go into the descent I hoped he did and became a bad guy by the end. And then remember the after credit scene from Amazing Spider-Man 2 when you're walking by the room and you see all the big setup for the Sinister Six with all the equipment? They meet in that same floor. And he meets Adrian Toomes and Harry Osborn. Morbius asks, what's this all about? Why'd you call me here? And they say they're setting up a team to take on a certain enemy, and we would like you to join. them obviously knowing what's going on with all of the Morbius stuff from the events of this movie. And they bring up on a monitor Andrew Garfield Spider-Man, which could be very, very cool. And Toombs would kind of play along because he doesn't know Peter Parker or Spider-Man anymore, but he knows Spider-Man's the reason he's in jail. Spider-Man's probably the reason why he's even in this new universe. So he wants revenge on Spider-Man no matter who it is. I feel like that would have played so much better, and people would have been freaking out about that. I think, at least. The last thing I want to say, rating on this, I'm going to give it a 3 out of 5. That's what I got. Not a passing grade, but not that bad. Really not that bad. But what did you think of Morbius? If you're on YouTube, comment below. If you're listening on audio platform, hit me up on Twitter. I would love to see what everyone else thought of this movie, because it seems like the general consensus is it's really not that bad. But until next time, see you later, nerds.